that would support the weaponry, resist the incoming cannonballs.
This new wall will resist, in fact, these larger guns because it can absorb the impact of the larger projectile.
Engineers would also redesign the layout of these thicker walls that surrounded the city.
Military engineers develop an angled wall.
The angled bastions, or star-shaped forts, kept attackers at a greater distance, with angled sides easily scattering individual shots of artillery.
The cities become star-shaped, and you have the development of these large star plans with angled bastions that project from the city walls with their flanking coverage on either side. The angles create a series of faces. The faces are very important because the different corners of the city can, as it were, protect one another.
The bastion fort became the new model for defensive fortifications, seizing the imagination of military commanders all across Europe. But soon, the attention would shift from Florence and the rest of Tuscany to an old powerhouse that would redeem itself through monuments of glory and amazing feats of architecture and engineering. Da Vinci and Michelangelo, while best known for their works of art, also worked as military engineers during the Renaissance. '15th century Italy. Florence has become the center for the Renaissance, bringing new ideas about architecture, art, and engineering to the region. But Florence would soon cede the limelight back to a former powerhouse, now on the rise again. Italy's center of power and glory would now return to the city that conquered the world, Rome.
In the early 1300s, there's a big beef in Rome about who exactly is pope. So the rightful pope supposedly goes off to France. And for the next several decades, the papacy lives in France. Now, by the 1370s, when the popes come back to Rome, Rome is a ghost town. And for the next 100 years or so, all the way through the Renaissance, each pope is successively trying to rebuild Rome. Now, in the 1490s, when the Medici are booted out of Florence, Florence becomes a republic, yeah, but they're broke. And so all these famous cats like Da Vinci, Raphael, and Michelangelo, they split Florence because Florence is no longer happening. If you're a player, the place you be is Rome.
Rome had been nothing in the 14th century because the popes had moved out. But they come back in the early 15th century, and from that point on, they began to gradually to reorganize the papal state.
One pope in particular would usher in an unprecedented wave of revitalization and engineering. His name was Sixtus V.
Sixtus and the popes who come after him feel the need to turn Rome into an important and impressive capital city, the capital of Christendom.
Sixtus V sort of took it upon himself to re-urbanize the city.
If Rome was going to be the home of the Catholic Church again, the city needed an extreme makeover. But re-engineering Rome would be an epic task. First, Sixtus was determined to clean up its mean streets. The city was teeming with criminals. Sixtus simply had all the vandals rounded up and killed. The next step was restoring the aqueducts, one of the greatest symbols of Roman engineering. When the water returned, the population boomed, and the city flourished. Roads were paved, streets widened, and the city exploded with new construction. But Sixtus wasn't done. He had a master plan for the city, a framework for organizing future development through the placement of monuments of glory.
One of his particular practices was, in fact, to use the ancient Egyptian obelisks that had been brought to the city by the ancient Romans. These were military trophies that the Romans had brought back in ancient times and had erected throughout the city. We know today that there are more Egyptian obelisks in Rome than in Egypt itself. And how Sixtus used these obelisks was to, in fact, place them as urban exclamation points.
Sixtus wanted to move one of those obelisks to the front of a new cathedral named St. Peter's Basilica. But he had a problem. It weighed more than 300 tons.
Moving the obelisk was no easy task.
Sixtus would award the challenge to architect and engineer Domenico Fontana. Fontana's plan seemed simple enough, but the execution proved nearly impossible. To protect the stone, he encased the 660,000-pound obelisk in a colossal wooden tower. Iron bars were attached along the edge. The wooden tower had columns extending nearly 100 feet in the air, with ropes pulled through the eyes of the iron bars so the obelisk could be winched up by windlasses. The plan was to use a crew of more than 900 men to execute the move. Using 40 windlasses, the obelisk was raised off the ground and lowered onto a platform of log rollers for the relocation to its new site. On April 30th, 1586, under the watchful eye of Pope Sixtus, the crew began the incredible engineering feat of moving the obelisk.
When the men were hoisting it up, they were under command to remain silent throughout the whole process, under pain of death, if one of them in fact broke the silence.
Finally, 17 days after they began moving, the obelisk reached its new location, in front of St. Peter's Basilica, where it stands today. Word of Rome's extraordinary revitalization spread throughout Europe. The capital of the ancient world had finally returned to center stage. And the age of architects that had begun in Florence had now transformed Rome and the rest of Europe.
Artists of all sorts could create such beauty, such wondrous works of art on the scale of St. Peter's Basilica, like the obelisks that were erected throughout the city of Rome, like the dome of the cathedral in the city of Florence. It gave the human significance again, and it gave us a bit of an attitude as well, that we are again the center of all things. And many people think it is with the Renaissance that modern culture actually begins.
Bella Firenze, beautiful Florence. Well, it looks pretty bella today, but believe me, in 2001, when I was sitting in a freezing apartment down there in the Arno in the middle of the dead of winter, pounding out papers until 4 o'clock in the morning on Botticelli, it didn't feel so bella. Matter of fact, I was just about an inch from getting the bella out of here, going back to my day gig in L.A. But I stayed, and I got my degree. And I keep coming back here to Florence and Siena, I don't know, to be of service, to teach a field trip or two, perhaps to sit in on a lecture by one of these brilliant professors who lives here and runs around Tuscany trying to explain how the miracles of the artists and architects of Italy in this period did so much to pull us out of that dark age and illuminate the daylight of our modern world. For the History Channel, I'm Peter Weller.